TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donation. Shalom ve'erev tov, good evening. Welcome to our daily TV7 Israel News Bulletin, broadcast from Jerusalem. An Israeli delegation met with a Syrian delegation headed by Foreign Minister Asaad al-Shaibani in Jordan yesterday in an attempt to de-escalate tensions between Jerusalem and Damascus. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent asserts the United States is now entering the endgame against the Ayatollah regime in Iran. And Iran's Supreme National Security Council threatens the international community against aiding the United States in Tehran's isolation. An Israeli delegation met with a Syrian delegation headed by Foreign Minister Asaad al-Shaibani in Jordan yesterday. The meeting was held after the Israeli airstrike on the Syrian military Abu Duhur airbase last week in response to Turkish intentions to deploy advanced military systems to include radars and surface-to-air capabilities at the site.
Israel just stopped a security threat inside Syria from becoming something much bigger. Let's take a look at what happened. Since the Syrian civil war, Turkey has embedded itself inside of Syria. It now has a substantial military presence in roughly 5% of Syrian territory. Now, if we look to the south, where Israel's located, by contrast, Israel now holds approximately 0.1% along a border that has threats from Hezbollah and ISIS and other terror organizations, which means that Turkey, that has no threats, is holding 50 times more Syrian territory than Israel. More than a year ago, Israel and Syria reached an understanding to maintain the security status quo and to keep this border calm. Syria breached that understanding. Israeli intelligence identified that Turkish troops were about to deploy at the Abu al-Duhur airbase, which is located in northern Syria, which is less than, as you can see, 200 miles from Israeli towns and Israeli communities. Prime Minister Netanyahu made Israel's position very clear. We will not allow Turkey to entrench itself in Syria and to be moving steadily south towards Israel's border. Israel warned Syria repeatedly, don't do it. We know that Syria received those warnings and that it chose to ignore them. So Israel delivered the message in another way. Now some might ask, why should Israel be concerned about Turkish forces in Syria? Well, because Turkish President Erdogan has openly called for Israel's destruction.
It is important to know that threatening rhetoric claiming Israel's annihilation was inevitable by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was made merely a few weeks after the Islamist Hamas terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip launched its murderous onslaught on Israel's southern communities, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, to include infants, elderly, men and women alike. And while 256 Israelis and foreign nationals were still in Hamas captivity at the time, with over 10,000 rockets and mortar shells fired by Hamas towards densely populated communities throughout Israel, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had called Israel a terrorist state and insisted that the world would soon turn against Israel on November 15th of 2023, all the while emphasizing his unwavering support for Hamas.
We never hesitate to say that Hamas is made up of resistance fighters striving to protect their homeland. Despite the discomfort it may cause some. Israel is a terrorist state. Israel will register itself as a universally condemned terrorist state everywhere.
President Erdogan continued by pointing out at Israel's alleged nuclear capabilities, baselessly alleging that Israel was threatening the world with nuclear warfare despite no recorded statements by any Israeli official of the kind, with Jerusalem clearly maintaining its policy of nuclear ambiguity.
I am calling on Netanyahu. Do you have an atomic bomb or not? If you dare, reveal it, but you cannot. O Israel, you are threatening with an atomic bomb, a nuclear bomb. We know all of this. Your end is approaching. Have as many nuclear bombs as you want. It does not matter what you have, but you are a gunner.
Since those remarks were made, the Turkish leadership had often repeated its threats against Israel, calls for the Islamic world to unite against the Jewish state, and statements that were made about the need to conquer Jerusalem. However, policymakers in Washington and elsewhere throughout Western civilization and even beyond brushed off these statements, labeling these as empty rhetoric. And while Turkey's military-industrial base grows exponentially, periodic remarks by some Turkish officials claiming they have no intentions to confront Israel are immediately adopted by Western officials as undisputed proof of Ankara's intentions.
Turkey said openly that they don't have an aggressive or offensive posture with Israel. They do not want to engage in kinetic or military operations.
U.S. Ambassador Tom Barrack, who also serves as President Trump's special envoy for both Syria and Iraq, went on to regard Israel's decision to strike the Syrian Abu Duhur Air Force Base as a mistake, particularly because they had not informed Turkey before launching the strike.
The mistake that was made was not miscommunication. Israel had thought that they had had a tacit agreement with Syria and a discussion with Turkey of saying, guys, after October 7th, everything has changed. We, Israel, want a clear line of sight between us and Iran, and we are really encouraging you not to put defensive or offensive military equipment or people between us. The problem with this is Turkey did not know it was coming. So the real issue here is without notice to a country like Turkey that has a powerful military, a forcible air force, a difficult political rhetoric between Israel and Turkey. By the way, in my opinion, it's mostly politics. But it came 80 kilometers to their border without notification, Israeli jets.
Ambassador Barrack, in his interview with PBS NewsHour, went on to highlight that the fact that Israeli aircraft struck while conversations were taking place had caught him by surprise, and that he expects Israel to communicate with the Turks via back channels instead of utilizing kinetic means. Turning now to the Iranian front, where U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent wrote in a Financial Times article on Sunday, quote, President Donald Trump and the overwhelming might of our military have significantly dismantled Iran's military capabilities and weakened its nuclear program. Now we're entering the endgame. At dawn begins an economic D-Day, the single greatest financial offensive ever marshaled against an adversary. The economic offensive comes as the Iranian currency crossed 2 million rials to the US dollar, which is an historic low. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump was asked whether the move against the Iranian economy indicates limitations on the US military options vis-a-vis Iran.
Shifting economic warfare towards Iran, does that indicate that the military options in the region for the U.S. are limited?
No, not at all. It just means that we're seeing what happens. They have no money. They have no Navy. They have no Air Force. They are not paying their soldiers. They're not paying their police. They have 350% inflation. So we're just going to sort of see what happens. And we have total control, as you know, of the border. We have total control If you look at the blockade, we have total control of that entire region having to do with the Strait of Hormuz. And that means well into it, the land areas. So they would love to make a deal, but they're not ready to make the right deal, in my opinion.
Meanwhile, in Tehran, the Ayatollah regime is threatening anyone who would help the United States in its economic isolation of the Islamic Republic.
If he decides to take further action, our response, our retaliation, will be seismic. First, we will tell all neighboring countries and countries around the world not to join the United States in its economic war. Any country that takes part in imposing economic restrictions on us will be regarded as an enemy. Of course, we will first negotiate with them. We will hold talks and tell them to step aside and distance themselves from the United States. But if they do not act, we will strike. We will target that country's interests.
While threats against anyone aiding the United States in isolating Iran continue to circulate by Iranian leaders and their supporters globally, the terror regime in Iran is unabashedly lying to its people in a desperate attempt to avoid renewed public dissent. Moreover, the Ayatollah regime is trying to turn the tables by claiming the latest economic measures aim to target the Iranian people themselves instead of the regime that suppresses them.
America, the America that was supposed to come to help the Iranians, is using every means available to punish the Iranians simply for one reason: because of their resistance to pressure on their national independence, sovereignty, and dignity. In this regard, the necessary warnings have certainly been given and are being given, because any kind of cooperation with America in advancing its aggressors' actions against Iran will certainly have its own consequences.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News, which is made possible by the generosity of our viewers. If you're blessed by our productions and would like to help support TV7 Israel, which operates as a nonprofit, you can donate via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Please keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem and salvation of Israel. I'm Jonathan Essen, wishing you a Shavua Mevorach. God willing, until our next update, Shalom from Jerusalem.